Do photographers need ND filters? Most of the time, when you hear people talking about ND filters, it's specifically related to video. And that's because ND filters are designed to reduce the amount of light that enters your camera. Now for video, that's important because you want to hit your 180-degree shutter rule, which says take your frame rate and multiply it by 2 to get a shutter speed that is 1 over twice your frame rate. But for photography, we don't really need that. So today I'm going to talk about 3 scenarios that aren't related to video where you may actually want to pick up one of these variable ND filters. Now, I will say if you're looking for a variable ND filter, I've reviewed probably 8 different brands on this channel, and even on a daily basis. I don't just carry one brand with me. I actually have quite a few different ones depending on the scenario of what it is I'm shooting, because not all variable ND filters are created equal. That's a whole video on its own. But if you're looking for recommendations in terms of image quality and what to expect from some of the more popular variable ND filters, you can check out this video right here. The first reason you might want a variable ND filter is because you're shooting with a low aperture lens. Anytime you take a photo, there are 3 variables that you need to consider. The first being ISO, or the sensitivity of your camera sensor. That's your sensor right there. The second is your shutter speed. And you can see when I turn the camera on and off, the shutter goes up and down. A low shutter speed, like 1 second, is when that shutter goes up and stays open for 1 second. But a fast shutter speed, like 1/50th of a second or 1/100th of a second, is when the shutter opens and closes really fast. Now, every camera has a maximum shutter speed. Now, in the case of the Canon R5, because it's a more expensive camera, it has a really fast maximum shutter speed of 1 over 8,000. But not all cameras are that fast. Some will max out at 1 over 4,000, for example. So let's say we're shooting on a bright sunny day on the equator at 12 o'clock noon when the sun is the brightest. It's a bright sunny day, there are no clouds in the sky. But then we snap that photo at 100 ISO, 1.2 aperture, because we're using a really nice lens where we want to get that really shallow depth of field and all that really nice bokeh in the background, and 1 over 8,000, and the photo is too bright. That's because there's just so much light entering our camera that the camera can't take a photo fast enough with the shutter to maintain the right exposure. In that case, you'd probably want like a 2-stop ND filter or one of these variable stop ND filters. You can throw that on there, set it to the number of stops you need so you can maintain your exposure for those bright sunny conditions. So needing an ND filter depends on the lens you're shooting with. It depends on the maximum shutter speed of the camera that you're shooting with, and it depends on the lighting conditions, such as if it's really bright wherever it is that you're shooting. But perhaps the most important reason for needing an ND filter depends on the type of photos that you're shooting. Sometimes it's actually preferred to have less light entering your camera. Like I mentioned, shutter speed is one of those important variables for controlling the amount of light that enters your camera. Now, sometimes you don't want a really fast shutter speed, like 1 over 8,000 or 1 over 4,000, or even 1 over 100. Sometimes you want a really slow shutter speed, like 1 over 30, 1 over 20. Like if you're doing panning photography where you're trying to get a subject in motion and you're trying to blur out the background, like in this photo of a car, you want to have a really slow shutter speed so that you can get those blurry lines, you can blur out the background, but then have your subject nice and sharp. Another option is if you're doing long exposure photography and you're doing it in the day. Quite often we think about long exposure photography at night because the conditions are already dark and there's already not a lot of light to begin with. But if you're shooting something like a waterfall, for example, like this photo, where you want to get the waterfall or anything that's moving to look blurry, then you'll need either a solid fixed ND filter or one of these variable ND filters. I tend to always carry multiple ND filters with me. Usually I'll carry a 6 to 9 stop, which is a little bit more of a darker ND filter. Like this is a 6 to 9 stop. This Polar Pro one is also a 6 to 9 stop. But if you're doing landscape photography and you're trying to get things looking blurry, either water or trees or whatever it is you're doing for that creative effect, then you definitely want an ND filter, or particularly a variable ND filter, because you can control how much of that light gets canceled out. Some tips when you're buying an ND filter is to buy the largest one for your largest camera thread size. In this case, I have my 24-70, which has an 82mm thread. That's typically the largest lens thread filter size that you'll encounter, but this 51.2 lens, for example, has a 77. This 70-200 also has a 77, and I don't know if you can see, but I've attached a step-up ring, which is literally just a piece of aluminum that changes the thread size from 77 to 82, and you can get these in all different sizes. I'll link the ones that I use down below. I literally attach them to all my camera lenses so that every time I get a new one, I don't have to go out and spend another $100 or another $300 on these really expensive variable ND filters. Not to mention that these are quite expensive. So if you're looking to save a little bit of money, you don't have to go with a variable ND filter. You can go with fixed ND filters. It just means you'll have to do more work taking one off, putting the next one on, which is why I tend to prefer the variable versions. And again, if you wanna know exactly which one I recommend, you can check out this video here or this video here if you're interested in watching more. And until the next one, go shoot photos.